How do you feel about your new position as CEO of the Sustainable Energy for All initiative? Are you up for the challenge?
I feel very excited about being CEO for Sustainable Energy for All. Excited because I have been given an opportunity to create something that did not exist before in the United Nations system. I'm also excited because I have very good partners like Sulaiman El-Habish of OFID and many other institutions who have said they were waiting for this kind of an impulse to combine forces to really make energy poverty history. So I am standing on the shoulders of giants who are ready for action, and I hope that my little effort will give them a solid institutional framework to work on this energy poverty agenda and also sustainable energy agenda, broadly speaking, over the next 2 decades.
As an African and a native of Sierra Leone, do you feel a strong emotional attachment to the issue of energy poverty?
Yeah, for me, this is a real subject that I feel honored to work on because it is based on my experience, and it's a normal experience. But as a kid, I know what energy poverty means. I have said the story over and over to many people. At university, I was in a university that did not have adequate power supply, so we could not get running water in the dormitories or the kitchens because there is no diesel to pump, to get the generator on to pump the water. I know what it means studying with candlelight in that university. And I know what it meant when I came back 11 years later as a minister, and still there was no power. But for me, it's a daily experience because I go home every year, 3-4 times a year. And I don't just stay in the capital, I go to my village. So it's a reality, and I have known now, leading an industrial development organization for the UN system, that you cannot have economic development without a reliable, affordable power supply. I know from an industry perspective and studies done by UNIDO, but also by World Bank in Africa, that Africa loses 2 to 3% of its GDP because of lack of energy or inadequate energy supply. So the link of energy with human development in general, getting the hospitals running, getting clean water supply, getting women off daily labor, because women spend about 20 hours a week collecting firewood and collecting water. So I know those social dimensions of lack of energy. But I also know that for economic development, job creation, wealth creation, you need affordable, reliable energy supply to grow the economy. And I know the impact now based on analysis that yes, in Africa, 2 to 3% of GDP is lost already. And we can't afford to lose it because GDP is not growing fast enough anyway.
You've just returned from a meeting of the Sustainable Energy for All initiative in New York, where the main focus of discussions was the $500 to $600 billion needed every year to meet the 3 goals of the initiative. Where is this money going to come from?
That's one of the, you asked me if I find my job challenging, that's one of the exciting challenges. We are talking about a global transformation of the energy systems. Our 3 targets, universal access to energy, doubling the annual rate of improvement of energy efficiency, doubling the share of renewables, is a narrative that is not just about poor countries. It's a narrative about changing the global energy mix, also for rich countries as well as poor countries. To do that, yes, our estimate done by the World Bank and the International Energy Agency is that we need about $600 to $800 billion a year going forward. And we use 2010 as the base. It was 400 billion in 2010. Most of that investment, where you will have the innovation and the job creation and wealth creation, will be in fact in the rich countries. Because energy efficiency cuts across so many parts of our life. But for the energy poor dimension, which I give credit to OFID and Sulaiman El-Habish and others who started this, in fact, 6 years ago, talking about energy for the poor. To deal with that segment of the challenge, we need about 50 billion a year. That's our estimate. So you see the bulk of it is transforming how energy is produced and used in the very rich countries and the emerging economies. It's every daily things we do, the lighting in the homes. You change the bulbs there to LED, you save significantly on energy going forward. The mass transit systems, better planning of cities, ways in which we make clean water available by recycling wastewater. In the Gulf countries, it's about desalination as well. But in the Gulf countries, we see more and more interest in energy efficiency. Why? If you save on energy, especially for the energy-rich countries, that means more revenues. That means more funding in your sovereign funds to create wealth for your people. So we can't waste energy anywhere. One of the best examples we saw recently is the announcement by Saudi Arabia. They're very aggressive on energy efficiency, but more importantly, they set a new target. 30% renewables in their energy mix by 2032. So I said to myself, wonderful. Our target in the United Nations Sustainable Energy for All initiative is doubling the share of renewables. If you look at it globally, it's about 30 to 36%. So the Saudi announcement is one of the best we've seen in the world, but it's the same in Brazil. Brazil is an energy-rich country. They are pushing now, they're already at about 70% renewables in their energy mix. They want to go even 80%. Norway, very rich oil and gas country, they want to do 100% electricity production from renewables. Why? It just makes economic sense. My other energy resource, in the case of Norway, oil and gas, I export, I raise more revenues, I ensure prosperity for future generations. But since God gave them more wind and more water, they say, hey, we use that resource, it's cheaper. The other resource we use for economic growth and wealth creation for our people. So our Sustainable Energy for All message applies to every nation in the world. You don't have to achieve all the targets. You take the target that is good for your own energy security. So it's a new narrative in the world. It requires a lot of cash, but it's not, we don't look at it as a cost. We look at it as a new business opportunity. In fact, we're calling it the third industrial revolution, based on new energy systems.
Compared to the overall investment needed to meet all three goals of the initiative, the first goal of universal access to modern energy services requires an estimated $50 billion a year. Does this make it easier to achieve, do you think?
Not necessarily. The resources required are less, but the institutional reforms required to crowd in the investment are very complex, because that's money required in the very poorest countries, the bottom billion. About 600 million of them in Africa, the rest in South Asia. Some pockets of energy poverty in Latin America and Central Asia. But the bulk is South Asia and Africa. These are countries where institutions are not working. These are countries where energy governance, the whole energy sector reform is required. Why? To do long-term investments in the energy system, whether you want to build a power plant based on diesel, you want to build a power plant based on concentrated solar energy, you want to establish a wind farm or a hydropower dam, all of those require a lot of analysis, pre-feasibility study, feasibility study, environmental impact assessment before you even put the financial package together. These things take 3 to 5 years on average, depending on the size of the project. But if you don't do that, and at the same time, you don't have legislation and a long-term strategy, investors will not be confident to come in to invest in your country. So those preliminary pre-investment stages are complicated to do, so it's not easy to bring investments. One of the most difficult part of it is risk. And this is why we need OFID. This is why we need the World Bank, IFC, and others. Private investors would like to come to a poor country to invest for business. However, before they come in, somebody else has to provide technical assistance, which OFID has done very well over time, to say, fine, we will help the government develop the energy strategy going to 20 years. We will then help them to have the right legislation in Parliament. And we will finance $3 million, $5 million to do all the pre-investment stages to get a viable, bankable project. Commercial banks will not do that. So it is very crucial, and that's why we're grateful that all the presidents of the multilateral development banks, plus Mr. El Habish, are central members of the advisory board of Sustainable Energy for All. This is an investment-driven vision. It is not just an aid-driven vision. This is not one of those cases where you say, okay, let's pass the basket around, get a few $50 million, we fix the problem. It's not like a vaccination. Energy systems are like any other infrastructure investment. They require an enabling environment, clear investment protection policies, incentives, and regulations that gives an investor the confidence to borrow $1 billion and know that that $1 billion has to generate revenues for 50 years, for a whole generation. It's complicated. So the whole risk profile of the country, and this is one of the biggest challenges, the risk dimension. What OFID and other banks, multilateral banks have done over time, whenever a private sector investor hears that, okay, OFID and the World Bank have decided they will assist this country, they take a second look. If the projects are designed well, the investor says, okay, the laws are in place, the project looks good, but you know, what if the government changes in 5 years? But I have invested for 50 years. What OFID and others have done, they've created instruments. We call them de-risking instruments for partial guarantee schemes, sometimes full guarantee, to draw down that risk. They say, fine, we'll put up a bond for you that will protect you for political risk, foreign exchange risk, but also now I hear people talking about off-taker risk. I'll give you an example. In the past weeks, we've been discussing off-taker risk. They say, okay, you say Sierra Leone, where I come from, you want to build a new dam, 200 megawatts, fine, we'll work with you, everything will be in place. But you know what we're worried about? People are not able to pay for it. Will the government change the pricing? More importantly, do you have major demand centers that will buy the energy? Because we're not doing it for charity, we need somebody to buy. The guy who buys it is that off-taker. And in some countries now, they're coming up with models where a mining company can say, fine, I'll buy 50% of the energy. The investor knows, okay, when I finish building in 5 years, there is a guy ready to buy 50%. That alone gives me confidence to say, fine, I start with him, and then with the consumers, it will be little by little because they're too poor to begin with. Then the government will have the courage over time to be able to raise the tariffs so I can pay the bankers and the other investors back. So OFID and others are watching these now to say, fine, how do we help mitigate that off-taker risk? How do we support the guy who is going to buy the energy over time to be willing to have the confidence that, okay, I'll sign the contract that in 5 years, I'll buy the energy from this company. But the reason I'm taking the risk is there is OPEC Fund for International Development, there is World Bank and MEGA to assure me that they will build that dam, to assure me that this guy will also not pack up in 3 years and leave. These are complicated infrastructure investments, and so it is crucial that we get OFID and others in the room. I'm interested in reducing the energy poverty, but they have to help me do it in a sense that is commercially viable, but has bigger social benefits for poverty, for hospitals, for education, but also environmentally friendly. That's the complexity of sustainable energy for us. That's what keeps me awake.